Welcome, guys, to the Revive Stronger podcast, and this is an episode of Revive to Stage. As always, I am Steve, and I am joined by our German pal, Pascal, who has been pumping his biceps.
I just wanted to show it another time because when we got on here, I was just flexing my biceps and Steve was just like marring it and saying, oh man, this looks big. So just wanted to show off here a little bit to get that rolling.
Slowly filling up with
Holy
glycogen.
Shit, what's that for child head in your arm?
So this week, we wanted to talk about something different. We didn't want to talk about, we thought about talking about, is natural bodybuilding dying? Because that's a really kind of clickbaity big topic right now. And in our opinion, it's not even something we really want to talk about as something that's happening. As far as we're concerned, it's not. And then also talking about, I'm literally, thank the Lords, on all the carbohydrates today because I've just finished my depletion and now I'm into my loading phase, which is insane because
we should compare the episode of so we are recording this episode on a Sunday, and 2 days ago we were recording an episode with Luke, which comes out on the Monday prior to this one, and we should compare the episodes and see if there's any changes in your behavior, the way you're talking and stuff like that.
I've already noticed, Pascal, like this morning, and I don't know how much of this is psychological, but physiologically, like after having this morning, I basically had like oats, banana, chocolate shake, protein shake. I've had I've probably had more carbs in the past 2 hours than I had in the past week almost. And I feel alive. Like it's insane the difference and how much of an uplift it gives you. And just, I overall just feel much more positive, much more energetic, and like I want to live. Whereas yesterday, it was an awful day. And the more I go through that peak week in depletion, the less I'm convinced that it's something that I would want to use. But that's for another story, and we'll see how I perform this weekend. And we'll talk to Broderick, get him on the show, and we'll do an episode all about that because I know people want to hear about I think it'll be interesting to hear Broderick's views on it whilst having me who's gone through it, and then Pascal from the outside kind of looking in, and because you've seen it from all the angles basically, which I think is really cool. But yeah, apart from that, I've actually lost the trail of thought. But yes, so we don't want to really talk about my peak week again because that's going to come in future. So we thought it's really interesting. People really enjoyed last week's episode with Pascal kind of talking about his struggles of coming out of contest prep, and how I think in some ways you are maybe still struggling, and how some people struggle in a gaining phase anyway, to keep on point. And a big part of that is hunger. And it's crazy because obviously I'm dealing with hunger and I was in depletion big time and it's a different type of hunger, I think, because obviously I'm low body fat, I'm depleting, like I'm going to extreme calorie deficits. So it's obvious why I'd be hungry, but then you're hungry because you're actually coming out of a diet, which again is, people are like, what? Like how can you be hungry in a surplus? But people are, and people are different. And there's different strategies and approaches you can take for different people for different times. And I think it's going to be really quite a productive chat for us to talk about it.
Totally.
So to open the floor, I had I said open the floor to Pascal floor.
I was in my head already like, oh yeah.
And I remember probably about a month ago, kind of talking to you about pizza. This happens quite a lot with us anyway. But it was probably about a month ago we were talking more about pizza, and I was like, and you were talking about the really nice pizza restaurant that's near you, and I was like, how have you not gone there yet? Like you're however many months post show, you're on 3,000 calories or so or something. So how have you not gone there yet? And then we spoke, and you were still having like lots of voluminous foods. I think you're having your pudding oats and stuff like this, and I was like, wow, like this is taking you a long time to kind of recover, as it were. So I thought that's what I'd open the floor with, in that how you can be on so many calories, be in a surplus, not even be like really low body fat, but having dieted for a long time and still not want to put calories aside for what might be a 1,000 calorie pizza or something along those lines.
Totally. And I mean, there's one point you already mentioned here in the beginning with the carbs and feeling like you're alive actually. And this was something I was experiencing big time when I was over in London, the time where I really pushed hard trying to actually squeeze out that little bit during the contest prep still, and where it was every single time I had a bigger meal, I was feeling so better and so much more alive. And the time when I then pulled the plug and decided, okay, today I'm going to stop. And that day when I had my first high carbohydrate meals, it was, you could see the change in my behavior, in my facial expression, in the way I was talking and moving on an hourly basis, which is absolutely insane. I mean, but this goes to show how much food can actually play a role, and also how much of a role it has psychologically, like in the way we are actually behaving. And I think this comes again down to those social behaviors as well. What we see in food, that food isn't only just there for survival, but also for pleasure. And we grew up with the mentality of having food always available and around us. And you made a really great post just recently on Facebook that you're not really starving. That hunger sensation you're experiencing is just, yeah, you are feeling a little bit hungry, but this is only because we are used to actually getting in frequent meals. Just imagine, so many people on the planet don't have the luxury of getting in frequent meals, and you are already complaining about 5 hours of not eating or something like that. But the total image, and getting back to the topic itself you started with the pizza thing, I didn't really feel like I was able or in a position where I could eat that pizza without then at the end of the day going way above my calories, because it didn't really, I knew that it wouldn't satiate me to that extent, and that just 2 or 3 hours later I would be ravenous again. And this would be kind of, I would automatically go in a massive surplus because of that. So this was the reasoning why I decided against having such foods in my diet for that time frame. And still, remember, still I was eating more than I wanted to. And this with high voluminous, not palatable foods, such as I was overeating on rice cakes. Like, I mean, how plain can it be? It's just, I mean, everyone out there, everyone had a rice cake. How plain and dry they actually taste. And man, overeating is the wrong word. I was going over my calories I wanted to hit for the day with something like rice cakes and with high voluminous foods. And then squeezing in a pizza wouldn't be the best idea, right?
Yeah. I just wanted to touch. This made me think. There's so many thoughts that are rushing through my head, which is all the carbohydrates. But it's funny you talked about how, like, you're hungry when you can overeat on rice cakes, or you can overeat on mushrooms. Not overeat on mushrooms, but like last week during my depletion, I must have eaten a ridiculous number of raw mushrooms, and like I'd eat them plain, just literally. That's how hungry I got. And it just, elements of this are making me pick up on kind of the fact that people might listen to this and be like, oh, so you hear all the benefits and you got them immediately. Like refeeds are obviously really beneficial, but the benefits about last as long as the time you give them. So if you only, that's why, and I just wanted to say, like, I can see how this is the appeal of refeeds. But for me, and I was slightly worried that doing this depletion and like this really high loading day, if I found like, it's basically like a bit of a binge on carbs, because it's so, like, it's ridiculously high. It's like 700 grams plus. But I actually, in my head was already this morning thinking, I wish I could spread these across the week. I don't really want to have that many this day. I mean, I know why I need to, for the purpose. But it's funny because different psychologies will pick up on different things, and this is why I think like some people really don't do well with refeeds because they could just get into that binging mentality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you were talking about basically, and this is something I think a lot of people post show or post diet fall into, in that they feel like, oh, I should be more flexible now. I should be able to eat out more. And then what happens is they do what you do, and they do have the pizza, whereas what you didn't, and then they do overeat because they can't keep things under control, and that's where the problems settle in. Whereas they'd probably be better off being like, okay, actually, the reverse diet, although we don't need to add tiny amounts of food all the time, actually giving myself the thought that, oh, I should actually take a bit of a process out of this dieting phase is a good idea, rather than just thinking, oh, I'm off contest prep or I'm off the diet and I can just go back to like normal eating like I would in the off season. It's like, actually, you're not in that position yet. And you realize that for yourself before even trying to go out.
Totally. And it's like Lyle also said on our podcast, with the people who think they are ready to go to a buffet, but they aren't ready.
Oh my God, buffets are my worst nightmare.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? That people think they have the power, if that's the right word for it, the willpower or the mental capacity to actually go through something like that, control themselves, and at the end of the day are still hitting their target macronutrients for the day. And most of the time that's simply not working, especially when you're coming out of a contest prep, because all the negative adaptations of your body, we should always keep that in mind. Your body is fighting for survival in that state. Yeah, and just by willpower avoiding or fighting against the fight for survival of your body is a real hard battle to actually win. And especially when you don't have that goal in front of you anymore, then it's so easy to fall for the temptation to just go with the flow. Everything is awesome, right? And what I did for myself is I said to myself that when I'm overeating, then I want to overeat on high protein or on carbohydrates. I always tried, no matter how much I overate or how much I was over on my total caloric intake, I always tried then to actually reduce the fat amount, because most of the time when we take a look at the physiology and how we actually store fat, it's mostly because of the excess fat. De novo lipogenesis from carbohydrates are only happening under rare circumstances. This happens when we are eating or overeating on carbs on a frequent or regular basis over days on end, and with fats being super low, like super low. Then de novo lipogenesis is really happening on more likely going to happen. And the turnover from protein into fats is even more unlikely to happen. So when you're actually overeating, then it's because of the excess dietary fats in your diet most of the time. Of course, there are different processes, and if you're overeating constantly, also with high carbohydrates, this will also get stored as fat. But in that regard, there are a couple of studies out there which show that if you overeat on carbohydrates for a couple of days in a row by, for example, 1,000 calories, people don't really get or gain that much of fat. And especially when it comes to overeating by protein, this is even more unlikely. There's this really cool study by Antonio et al. Where they overfed people by 4.4 grams per kilogram of protein, like 800 calories more, and they didn't really gain any kind of significant amount of body fat, and even I think improved their body composition compared to the other
volume training.
Yeah, compared to the other subjects. So I'm not saying, okay, go out, overeat now on high carbs and high protein and you're good to go. This isn't the case. But I just wanted to wrap it up and keep it in perspective that for myself, when I was in that situation, I wanted to make sure that when I'm in the situation where I'm probably overeating on my total caloric intake for the day or for the week, I wanted to make sure that it mostly is from carbohydrates to fuel also my workouts, and also protein, because it's less likely that this is getting stored as fat in your body. And I mean, when people are then going out and binging on everything, like having Ben and Jerry's, having the pizza, they end up at the end of the day with 200, 300 grams of fats. Of course, this will then be stored as fats, right? I mean, yeah, so much more easier.
I think it is really important to reiterate to the listeners that you're not saying that if you are in a calorie surplus and your fats are kept low, then you're not going to gain fat. Like if you're in a calorie surplus, it's going to happen, but it's just less likely that you're even, first of all, going to get into a calorie surplus if you overeat on the carbs and the protein, because of all the different things they can also cause your body to do. Like the thermic effect of feeding from protein is really high. Carbohydrates upregulate your metabolism the most out of anything. And then when you're talking about fat, really, and this is something I've got from my consults with Broderick, he's like, past minimum levels, it's just a throwaway nutrient in reality. Like it makes food taste good, but once you've got enough for just your health, after that, for performance and physique purposes, unless you're trying to bulk up and you're struggling to get in enough calories, it's not really worth thinking about. So yeah, I think that's a good takeaway, is if people do have the foresight like you do to control that, and they know they're going to want to overeat. And this is something I've thought about actually, is overfeeding people, reversing out on protein, because it's like, well, at least you can keep yourself fuller for longer and you're less likely to store as much fat.
Yeah, this brings up a really good idea actually. Like the post show window, let's call it that, like for the first couple of weeks, instead of trying to give them too much wiggle room, try to say, okay, here are your ranges for carbs and protein, for example, and limit the fat intake so that they have some wiggle room and they are flexible after the show, but that most of the excess macronutrients come actually from protein and carbs, instead of then giving them too much flexibility and only focusing on like the recovery diet, like getting them up to a certain body fat level as quickly as we can, so that we then can start or be in a healthy position.
Yeah, I guess it's like almost similar to like peak week, in that loads of different people, there's loads of different approaches that are suitable for different individuals and their given lifestyle and situation. I think the same is for the post-show period, but I do think, and what we do for our clients is try and get to as close to optimal as possible and then work backwards from there, rather than just starting them where they're at, kind of find out what optimal is and then move away from that as far as we need to get them their optimal. So like for the peak week, maybe this depletion and then the loading is optimal and it's going to work to get the absolute best. But in reality, how many people are going to be able to do it? Maybe not that many. So it's the same with that reverse diet. Maybe kind of having, I don't think the tiny additions of reversing is optimal, but maybe having kind of a slightly slower approach rather than the more aggressive, assertive recovery diet approach is optimal. But see who can deal with that. But I think we're both in huge agreement that competitors often kind of either they do a few things, they order like Domino's to the contest, like to the show, or they like get their mate to come and bring a whole box of Krispy Kremes to go and binge on straight afterwards, and that ends in awful things. Or they're literally, the worst thing I could see them doing, and I think I see this far too often, they book like a cruise, an all you can eat all-inclusive cruise, and it has like, and if you've ever been on a
shout out to Jeff Nippert.
Oh, did he do this?
Yeah, he was actually talking about it on one of his podcasts during the time, I think the last time he stepped on stage was already 2 or 3 years ago, and Robin and him both went on a cruise, or both competed and then went on a cruise, and it was just,
that's even worse.
Both just said that this was the worst idea. It was still enjoyable, the whole thing, but Man, on a cruise, there's so much food available. I've never been on a cruise, but I could imagine that there's so much highly palatable food available, like 24 hours.
It's literally your utter worst or best nightmare. Like if you're someone who if you wanted to gain the most fat possible in the shortest window of time and get the most value for money, book a cruise post show, because, mate, the ones I've been on, there's like chips. Basically, there's different stations all around the cruise ship. Like one selling, they're not even selling it because it's all free. It's all inclusive. So there's like cookie stands, ice cream stands, chip stands. It's all awful food as well. There's no like veggies everywhere. It's all terrible food for you. And then like the dinner is like, if you go to dinner, which is like you dress up for it, was like a 3-4 course meal. And then if you were indecisive about something you wanted for dinner, they'd bring you both, because they're just like, just have both. Or you could go to the buffet, which was open like all day basically, and it was just ridiculous. Everything and anything you could ever want or think of. Like you could even get like personalized pizzas.
Mate, it sounds to me like I was a really fat and chubby kid, right? And back in the days, I always heard people from other parents talking about sending their child on like a boot camp.
Yes.
Where the children are actually losing weight. And for me, it sounds like the reverse boot camp for adults.
It
like
literally is.
Sending an adult on a 2-week cruise where the only purpose is to eat as much as possible in the most beautiful setup and way.
It was like I've been on them, and it's really hard because like there's dessert, but then there's like a cookie section, and then there's like 6 different cookies, and it's not like you're buying each one. You've already paid for everything, and then so you're like, well, I want to get my like money like worth. And then alcohol as well, that's like often included. So it's just like, it is the worst thing for someone who is ravenous to go into that, especially someone who's been restricted as well, because no matter if you're following flexible dieting or not, like my diet is restricted. Like I'm having oats a lot because they're great and they keep me full. But when I have the option of like all these different breads, all these different kind of starches and like potatoes and chips and fries, and it's like, wow, like it just opens a whirlwind.
And the problem most of the time is that with the contest prep, we've talked about it in the past a couple of times. You have this extreme goal. You have a set date in your mind that you need to achieve a certain conditioning to that point, right? And when you finish with that, we talked about that post contest blues. You're in a situation where the goal of gaining isn't as severe as extreme, even though if you're setting yourself a goal, it isn't like, it is still flexible, right? And it's also hard to measure. With contest prep, you need to actually be in a certain condition on that date, because otherwise there's no real point to then step on stage. But when it comes to gaining, whether you gain 1-2 pounds more on that specific date or not, it's hard to quantify actually. And this, I think, causes a lot of problems for people because it's that hard to quantify. And then it's so easy to actually go off board, be too flexible actually in the off season. And it's so easy to lose track and lose the focus of the intentional goal.
Yeah, I think people can go one of 2 ways. They can say there's like this zone we want to be in here. They can either go to the right of it and gain too fast because they just haven't got anything to keep them kind of under control. And I think that can very much be influenced a lot by the type of character that person is. And if they kind of get too far away from tracking and things like this, their social life, their social surroundings. So if they've got like a girlfriend who loves to eat out and try all these bake lots of good food, and someone like Charlotte who's a female,
thinking of Charlotte,
or someone who's like very active and into the gym themselves, they might keep them over kind of more in this optimal zone. And then you've got the people, I think, who will go too far to the other end, and they'll end up being like, oh, like I can't gain any fat. I need to only, like the amount of clients, and I'm sure you've got it as well, who are like similar level of advancement to me, and they're saying to me, can we just gain at a rate at which I only gain muscle mass, or I gain more muscle mass than I do fat? And I'm saying to them, in actuality, if you have the aim to gain either a 1-to-1 rate or more like a kind of more muscle to fat, you actually end up spinning your wheels and not gaining anything, because at our level of advancement, once you're like intermediate and above, you actually need to you have to accept more fat gain than muscle gain. And no one wants to accept that, because that's like accepting more costs than the benefits you're going to get. But that's a short-sighted viewpoint, because when you cut down, you keep all those benefits and you can get rid of that cost. But it's really hard.
It's very well put, I think. And also, I just wanted to mention your approach and your mentality when it comes to the off season, because you said it at some point, and I think it was in a Facebook post as well, where you just mentioned that you don't see the off season as off season, but more so like improvement
season. Yeah.
Improvement season on a different level. It's still, you're having still a goal in front of you, and this is the next competition season, right? Perhaps you can share it a little bit before I'm blabbing on and putting it the wrong way or something.
Yeah, no, I don't know who I heard it from. I'm sure I heard it from someone, because it sounds far too smart for me to have come up with. But in my eyes, a good contest prep is the sign of a good off season or a good improvement season, because when you're in prep, that's when you're stripping everything down. That's kind of like, in many ways, it should be the kind of easier process, because you're trying to keep what you built in the past, and all you're doing is getting rid of the cost, and you're trying to keep all of your savings. So whereas in the off season or in your improvement season, this is when you're actually gaining lean muscle tissue, which is going to make a difference to your package on stage. This is when you're building up and not dieting all the time, and you're actually allowing your calories to come high. And I try and come away from like building your metabolism, because I know you can't build your metabolism, but you can sure make it as high as possible. You can feed yourself as many calories as possible, be doing as little cardio as possible. So when you come to cut down, you're in a really good place. And the same with, you keep your body fat levels under control. So it's kind of, you're trying to balance all of these things in a very kind of precise way, because if you let any of them go out of control, if you do end up bulking too fast and cutting all the time, then you start your kind of contest prep, you're not in a great place to start it. So I think a sign of a successful contest prep is actually the sign of a really good improvement or off season, because there's so many things that people don't realize you actually need to get right, because too many people will come and bring the same package year to year, or even worse packages, because maybe they do a show and then they gain a load of fat afterwards, so then they cut down, and then they don't actually end up gaining any new muscle tissue, and then they come to start contest prep again and they're on lower calories than they were before, so they have to cut even harder. They lose muscle tissue, and they could actually look worse year to year, or over 2 years. So if you just need to have a plan for your improvement season, and something I'm going to need, and something I want this podcast to be for me, and this Revive to Stage and you, is to keep me accountable, because I know for myself, I fall into that adipose phobia trap of, I don't want to gain fat, or especially for me right now, like my quads have never ever got close to this level of conditioning. My glutes have been this conditioned or close. My lower back's been pretty much as conditioned as it is now. Everywhere else is pretty much, I've got there, but my quads are on another level. And I know the only reason I got there is because I had a good off season, a good improvement season. So putting on the fat and losing any definition, because I know I lose it all, is going to be hard for me. But I need to just accept that it's going to happen.
This brings up a question for me then, because you are coaching yourself, and how are you actually then dealing with the fact of staying kind of objective to yourself? In that, because I could imagine that it's absolutely hard to stay subjective, to stay objective, especially when you looking as good as you've never did before, then you need to accept to actually lose that kind of conditioning. And when you're then self-coaching, when is the point where you're then actually going through those mental struggles, and how are you actually dealing with them? Because you need to stay objective in that kind of situation, but the emotional aspect probably overwhelms you in that situation as well. And how do you actually cope with that?
So I think this time around is going to be far better than I did between my last show and now, because I didn't really have a coach since my last show. And the way I did it then was basically using our objective measures of the scale, weight, of performance increases, of looking myself in the mirror. And I often find the best way for me to progress is to kind of switch off almost. Mm-hmm. It's like when I get deep into this period of time, I just tick the boxes. I don't focus too much on scale and too much on these things. And I just kind of, I embrace the process, as it were. And there are times at which I know I got stagnant, or I allowed myself just to spin my wheels because I got comfortable. Whereas this time round, I have yourself to keep me accountable, who I honestly want you to. I want you to be like, Steve, I can tell you're just stagnating. You're just not, you're not pushing. I've got obviously all of our clients, our audience here. And then I think having consults now and then, like for my prep, when I've been doing the consults with Broderick, like just talking about peak week strategies and things like this, it's kind of good for me because it kind of keeps me accountable to someone in that sense. So I think I will use some of those tools, and and I'm sure you will as well. We'll have consults with some of the bright minds in the industry, and they keep us on track as well. But in all honesty, apart from all of those ways, I think a lot of it is just, as long as have a plan, I'm going to set out a long-term macro cycle and follow it through. I think in many ways you have to trust the process. And if you keep checking too often on such a slow process, such as muscle growth, you end up shooting yourself in the foot.
It's just, the reason why I'm asking is because you can see it with, especially unfortunately, a lot of female clients who are shooting themselves in their foot because they are afraid of gaining, and it's not only female athletes. I want to really make it clear here that it's not gender specific. I can see it in many male clients as well, but most of the time those are female clients, that they are going through this emotional roller coaster. And every single time you have a check-in, and every single week it's a different kind of check-in, where it's like the 1 week everything is going smoothly, they are hitting all the macros, doing the training, everything is going great in their lives, their mood is really up. And then the next week they are doubting everything, they see themselves in the mirror, they see themselves as being fluffy, they think they are gaining too quickly. And this applies to everyone, I think. And this is the reason why I bring it up, because I think that every single day you are in a different state of mood and mind. And when you get up, and I experienced it myself, there are days where I get up where I feel fluffy simply because I'm not in the right mindset. And those are the days where you then make rash decisions, and perhaps decisions in the long run which aren't really helping you progress in the way you would like to. And just to share my experience, what I did here now is we talked about it yesterday, right? That I'm right now in the mindset of, because I always get this moon face, this puffy face, and it is so obvious to me every single day. I get confronted with it every single day, right? Every single time I go into the bathroom, I can see my face. It's not the same with my body composition in general, right? It's not that I pull off my shirt whenever I go out. Even though I'm a bro. No, but this is why I then always get reminded of, okay, you look puffy. This isn't really what you're like. Perhaps you gain a little bit too quickly. Perhaps it might now be the best time to actually cut again. And then there's, on the other hand, where I know that cutting isn't the best idea for me right now because I'm not mentally prepared to go through that cutting period, and also physiologically not, because I'm seriously ravenous all the time. And when I decide to actually cut, I would be able to stick to a deficit like 1 or 2 days and then go overboard or go to maintenance again. And point being is what I want to say is just like, how will you keep yourself accountable in that situation when you're going through those emotional roller coaster rides where you see that you're gaining fluff? And when is the point where you keep yourself like, or remind yourself that this is a normal process? And when don't you, how should I put it? How is it like that when you have the feeling that you're getting puffy, that is actually only in your head, but it's not really happening, that you're still good to go to push? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I completely do. And I think it's something I've talked about. As you get closer to stage, you realize, or closer to let's say closer to stage, you're becoming less of a performance athlete as a bodybuilder, and you're becoming a physique athlete. And so you focus more on what is my physique looking like than what is my performance doing in the gym, because you have to accept the cost of potential performance loss. And so when you're in a gaining phase, now focusing less on being a physique athlete and focus more on being a performance athlete. And so when you're losing some of that physique loss, so maybe the facial aesthetics or something along those lines, you accept those costs for the benefit of the fact that your performance is going up. And you know, if you're lifting more on squats for your 10 by 3 or whatever it is, then you're gaining quad size, quad musculature. If your quads are looking fatter, that is what it is right now. That's not the goal. The goal is performance. So I think this is why a lot of bodybuilders, especially natural bodybuilders, get into powerlifting, because it shifts their attention from physique to performance.
Do you think
that's a good thing?
Do you think it might be a good thing then to push as long as your performance is increasing, and then when it's kind of stagnating, to do something like a mini cut, for example, when the threshold is at the point where you see that you accumulated a little bit too much fat?
I think that's quite individual. I think if it was you in your current situation, I'd say you continue and take the performance, because you said you're still ravenous, you've still got those diet fatigue factors. Whereas for someone who doesn't feel diet fatigued, who is feeling kind of absolutely fine to go for a mini cut, I think actually the mini cut's probably going to suit them really well, because that will strip off a layer of fat, it will potentiate some more muscle growth. Whereas I think it very much comes down to the individual and what's that diet fatigue lagging factor holding on? Is that still there for them? And when I get to that situation, and I know I will, I think I will defer to people who can be objective about my situation. So I'll talk to Charlotte, see what she thinks I'm being like. I'll talk to you, see what you think. I might talk to Mike Israel, some people in my kind of network. But I think, it's because there becomes a point at which, your performance could still be going up, but do you always, when does it, I struggle with the argument against, if your performance is going up, then why wouldn't you continue? I honestly completely see that. I can see why you just keep going.
It was more of a rhetorical question to some extent, because I mean, the more fat you put on, this is why heavyweights actually lift heavier weights than people with the same height, but weighing less, right? And I mean, because fluff actually gives you some cushion as well, gives you a better range of motion most of the time. So when you're gaining fluff, your performance will most likely increase, and this for a long time, without you then realizing that perhaps you pushed it a little bit too far. So
I think I have a good solution for it. If it was a situation where, okay, let's say this is the way I would work it anyway. If I got to the upper end of my body fat percentage that I wanted to get to, like a number of pounds above stage weight, or I'm not actually going to use that as a marker. I'm going to more so look at my physique and be like, all right, how fat am I looking? Once I get to the point at which I'm like, that's as fat as I want to get, I'll then consider, right, how am I feeling mentally, diet fatigue, all of these things. If I'm feeling in a not the best place, then I think a maintenance primer phase is ideal. And that's then where you can, after that, go for a cut. If you're in a place where you don't have that diet fatigue lagging around, mini cut. I think that's a good way to go about it, because I think you're completely right. I think people far too often make the argument of, oh, if your performance is still increasing, then just keep going. But sometimes, and we've seen this with diets, is like, right, yeah, your diet's going really well, but you've been dieting for 6 months? Like you're just on the edge of that cliff waiting to fall off. And there's bad things accumulating while you're going through this period of time.
Totally, and it's also the same when it comes to implementing something like a diet break, for example. Yes. Just here in the morning, I had one of my clients checking in with me, and she basically said, we had a diet break here last week, right? And she basically said now after the diet break that it wasn't the perfect call.
Yes,
she would have never done it herself.
Yeah.
And after that week, she felt so much better, and she's feeling able to push now for the next upcoming blocks and weeks.
Yeah.
And it was like the analogy we are always throwing out there. You don't want to push the gas pedal to the point where you're running out of gas, or where you're just crashing and not getting to your goal eventually, right? And this applies to the same when it comes to dieting or accumulating fat on a gaining phase, while still performing well and stuff like that.
Exactly. You've got nothing to lose by taking the break there. Like, great, you've got momentum, and I think momentum's great, but momentum can only take you so far, and you can like crash and burn before it's too late. It's like not taking a deload because you don't feel like you need it. And the amount of times I've had clients be like, don't think I need a deload. I look over their performance. I'm like, yeah, it's good. But if you're asking, do I need to take a diet break? Do I need to take a deload? The answer is, if you're asking, take it. Because if unless you've got some sort of time limit, then there's nothing to lose by taking it early.
Definitely. How can we wrap it up? I mean, we started with
quite a good wrap up, but
talking about hunger, then talking about going through those mental struggles, and what else? We covered so much in this episode again.
If I was going to try and summarize and give a TDLR for the internet listeners, it would be something along the lines of: know yourself as an individual, look for objective markers and a support network around you in these periods of time, and pick a method and stick to it that's going to suit you. And check in on it now and then, but there's elements of having to trust the process. And if you struggle a lot with these sort of aspects and you have never been coached, a coach is going to help you so much through that period of time. We haven't talked about specific hunger strategies and stuff, but we can come to that. And if people have got questions, then I'm sure we can cover that in future. But I think, the biggest takeaway for me is, know yourself and be really honest, and find a support network.
And I think this basically is like having an objective eye. And if you're not capable of having that objective eye yourself, which is really hard, this is why the top athletes out there always, or most of the time, always have a coach at their side, because they can make the decisions the athlete don't see or don't want to accept. And this brings me then to the point, if you're not able to actually have an objective eye for yourself, consult with people like a coach, friends around you who can give you an honest opinion. It's not like going to grandma who's saying, man, you're always looking so smooth and handsome. No, it's not that, but I want you to actually go to someone like, for example, me, going to Steve and asking for his honest opinion, because only then this will benefit and help you. And tiptoeing around the harsh truth doesn't help anyone, right?
Awesome. No, I think that was a great wrap up. And as always, if people do have questions or anything they want specifically covered, let us know. In future, maybe we can do a post to our Facebook group, which there'll be a link to below, if people want to get involved and join that community, to do a like Q&A. People can chuck in questions there, and we'll just go back and forth and answer them, because it's really fun to do so, and that's the best way to get you a load of value, guys. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully you've taken something away from it. I'm going to go and enjoy the rest of my carbs today. It's actually making me cry to think about how much I'm going to enjoy them.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah,
lots of Snacker Jacks.
Snacker Jacks. I haven't planned any in, actually. I planned in.
What the fuck is wrong with you, mate? At least a pack, mate.
At least one pack. I definitely can. I think what I've planned in is only 400 grams, so I've got another 300 or so.
We don't have Snacker Jacks here in Germany. We only have those plain rice cakes, like with corn rice cakes.
Oh yeah,
rice cakes, and what's it called in English? Oh, I don't know. Let's not talk about that.
You just need lots of jam and honey and golden syrup. Then you're solid. You're sorted.
That's true. Cool.
Cheers, guys. We'll catch you shortly.
Yeah, cheers.